not everything is an AI problem. Sometimes it's more of a conditional logic, human reasoning function. And sometimes I am a little fatigued by automation everywhere, but I think it's an important ideal to strive to because ultimately we want that efficiency, but not at the cost of, human reasoning and humans working together collectively to solve problems.
Welcome to Supply Chain Champions, the show brought to you by Project 44, where we're talking to the people who make supply chains work. Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Supply Chain Champions. I am your host, Eric Fullerton. Today on Supply Chain Champions, we are taking on the biggest buzzword in the technology and really supply chain industry. That's right. Today, we are talking AI. And to do that, I am very fortunate to have a true expert in the AI space joining us today, Amanda Cameron. And Amanda is an AI and machine learning customer engineer at Google. She's really focused today on supply chain use cases. And she's going to help us demystify AI a bit. Get a little bit specific and tangible, and hopefully, maybe we won't get too technical. So, Amanda, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Sure. So let's get started with a question. I kind of want to start at the top, which is there is a lot of terminology today, and there is misconceptions and a lack of real understanding almost at the baseline level in terms of what these things actually mean. So if we start at the top and you get some clarification, there are three terms, three words, three phrases, however you want to think about it, that are often used interchangeably, but they're different things. So we have AI, we have machine learning, and we have data science. And what I'm hoping as we get started is, can you just at the top level clarify what is the difference between those things? How are they different? And what do they need?
It's something I actually get a lot with my customers, no matter what level of the business that they work at. And I see artificial intelligence as really that top level layer. It covers a lot of areas, in decision science, not just data science. We'll keep it simple for now and go from there. At a high level, artificial intelligence just refers to this capability to mimic human decision making. So that can be in really effective artificial intelligence systems, or can just be if this, then we take this action, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be this super complicated deep learning algorithm. And when I think about machine learning, we're starting to go down the AI value chain from my perspective. We're making an inference off of something that happened in the past. So we're talking about techniques and methodologies such as classification or regression. And then the data scientist, the AI is one tool in their tool belt, but they're also concerned with the data as a whole, making decisions. What insights do I need to surface to tell a certain story to the business, to prove value to the business based off of this initiative that's happening?
Okay, that makes sense. I go to a lot of conferences, and I feel like every conference that I've been to in the past 3 years has had a significant focus on AI, whether it's the keynotes or the topics, where they have an AI track. And I guess what I've found time and time again is that these forums result in a conversation that is too high level, which is most often, right? Which is, oh, we need to use AI. Yeah, we're going to use AI to fix that. And that's the most often. But then there are some instances when things get very technical very quickly. And I think it can be challenging to kind of find that middle ground. And what I think that middle ground is, and we chatted about this a little bit, is the use cases and practical application. So what I wanted to start with, and we'll go broader, can you give me one very practical use case for AI and supply chain? Ideally, it's something that you've worked on.
Yeah, no, I'd really love to. And I've been working on in the past year of supply chain has actually been around, making sure critical commodities like strawberries, blueberries, and, other commodities associated to a cold chain and a supply chain. How do we deliver something that's super fresh to the store so the consumer has a good experience? Where it gets really interesting and complex very quickly is in supply chains, you have a lot of regulations and laws that are instantiated that you want to make sure that you're compliant with. And one such example of this is going to be the PACA Act. It's the Perishable Agricultural Commodities Act. It was actually passed in 1930. So this is where thing and AI gets really interesting from my perspective is you have this old law that's still in practice today. And now we get to use new technology to be compliant for that law more efficiently and also more importantly in a more transparent way. And so at a high level, like why PACA is important is it protects growers, it ensures, farmers and sellers get a fair payment for the perishable goods, and it also just promotes fair trade in general. And the USDA, as a organization, it provides like arbitration and mediation services. Any business that's buying or selling produce or participating in interstate or foreign commerce, they have to obtain this PACA license. And so essentially what that means from an AI perspective and how generative AI specifically can help is AI can make sure that, we're analyzing data to ensure at the distribution center specifically that we're visually inspecting produce to ensure and proactively identifying food safety risks. So if we're delivering on this concept and promise to consumers, if I'm a business and I want to deliver the freshest commodities at the store, then I'm going to be beholden to PACA and I'm going to want to understand how technology can help me deliver that at the nexus of regulation and innovation.
So that makes sense in terms of the use case. And now I'm thinking next time someone asks me about how would be an AI use case, I'll just say strawberries. But how would you actually use AI to help maintain that compliance?
Yes. So, for example, I'd want like two essential capabilities this concept of predictive modeling, right? Leveraging traditional machine learning workflows to do classification, analyzing historical data that's in the WMS so we can identify patterns. So, for example, high risk distribution centers, whether it's their location or maybe the quality analysts that are inspecting the produce as it comes off the truck maybe they're not as tenured as quality analysts at a distribution center. So now you have this gap and, humans making decisions and doing the best that they can. And if I'm someone in the business, I want to make sure that no matter what distribution center I'm in, that there is a unifying standard of what freshness is. And we want to be able to take action on that. And artificial intelligence is one tool that can help us out with that. And so specifically with image recognition, and quality control, right? We start to go from if we do have to fill out this manual defect report based on the quality of strawberries in a distribution center, can we start thinking about it in terms of where does automation start to weave in to help improve this process? And on top of automation, we really want that real time monitoring, that data fabric from the sensor data on the truck. And so now we're starting to develop this workflow of if I'm on a farm, if I'm a grower that's selling my, strawberries to a specific business, we're all functioning under and we're beholden to PACA in this specific way. But we want to make sure that there's that traceability, this almost ledger that we're building of the health of my commodities from the farm to the store with the distribution stops in between.
I like the specificity because I think that's one of the things we're missing. So what I want to do now is I want to zoom out. We're going to talk a little bit about you and your career, starting off kind of around data architecture, cybersecurity space. We go into AI and machine learning engineering, and then there's the Google component, and now kind of really keying in on retail supply chain space. And that's actually a very short version of your career, and you can certainly extend it. But how does that happen?
I've been actually asking myself a lot because I've been in the corporate world for the past 8 years since I graduated college. And I never really thought I would be here. I actually wanted to get a PhD in systems biology and kind of look at CRISPR and, I won't go into that too much, but basically mathematically modeling a biological process. And I was never really a math nerd. I was never someone who traditionally was always very good at math. I actually wanted to be an English major when I joined college, but I think it's important. And actually, my love of reading has really served me well in my career. And what I tell folks, and I've had the opportunity to go back to my alma mater and connect with so many other folks in networking contexts. And what I really tell people is you just got to really find where the need is and follow your curiosity. And so, like, when I first started my career in cybersecurity, I thought it was something that was a really cool adventure and a way for me to find meaning in the globalization and what was happening in the larger world, and starting to kind of understand is going from that perspective of I'm a consumer, I'm going to businesses to buy these specific services, to I'm actually in the business and I'm learning how businesses deliver solutions to consumers. That was something, making things real was something that really has always driven my curiosity. And so kind of moving up a little bit at AT&T, I really cut my teeth on. I started out as a business intelligence analyst, analyzing software security information. There's a software supply chain, right? So while I've really been working in retail for the past 2.5 years, I've been kind of carving out this specialization in back office transformation, not just supply chain, but like HR processes where we can apply generative AI, financial processes where we can apply generative AI to accelerate solutions in that space. So it just kind of felt very natural in my career too, right? Or whether you're solving a problem, or if we're talking about my career, you really start with that core data foundation. You need to understand how systems work in a business. And then I kind of went from there to that, well, how do we build solutions with data? And AI is a very natural part of that.
That's awesome. I think one of the things, as we were getting to know each other a little bit, you said something really interesting, but I will also say that it's not necessarily uncommon. And what you said when I talk to people in this space, which was, I haven't always been working in supply chain, but I kind of always have been working in supply chain, right? So when you think about that, and we talked about how software has a supply chain too, I think that kind of mindset we're seeing more and more. I want to shift talking about mindsets though, because one of the other things that I think is interesting for you in your position now, and probably even historically throughout your career, is there's this kind of old guard, new guard component where you have these very tenured supply chain professionals with super valuable and tremendous experience. And then you have these kind of newer technologists, systems, AI, engineering mindset. So can you talk a little bit about that? How does that play itself out for you?
When I was at AT&T, we were always very interested in the inventory of inventories, right? That was kind of our North Star. Basically, what we were really interested in fundamentally was we were applying this old lens of how much inventory, how many infrastructure assets do I have? Well, that's an easy question when you're not working with cloud centric assets. But when you're working in the cloud, you have to change that. We had to change our paradigm and our reporting model of this infrastructure asset is ephemeral. It doesn't live forever, and we're not afraid to turn it off, right? And so that's one example of, and bringing it back to supply chain is when in working with going back to commodities specifically, you have heavily tenured quality analysts who spent decades building specifications between what and analyzing what the USDA specification is, talking to business folks, understanding what their standard for fresh is, correlating that, building new specs, evolving specs, right? So now you're sitting on all of this unstructured data built from years of experience. That's extremely difficult to scale. But at the same time, that is incredibly valuable for a business. So if I'm a business executive, I want to understand, how do I tap into the brightest minds in my organization? And how do I ensure that logic is running automated processes in my organization?
Okay, thank you. So that makes sense. I think one thing I think would be a good transition is that when you think about many of the processes and the systems that are required, or at least maybe not required, but used for supply chains to function today, many of them are still older. We have legacy technology, and even beyond that, I mean, there are paper processes that are still being used all across the supply chain ecosystem. So when you think about bringing in net new, very cutting edge technology like AI, it can be a little bit of a challenge. So what I wanted to get your take on is, what are some of those viable use cases for AI in supply chain today?
I think this is such an interesting area. And I think when you're using and applying AI to use cases, you really need to meet companies where they're at, right? And so there's still a space, and I don't see some paper processes going away in the next year or so, just because, generative AI is very good at, developing unstructured reports that paper processes are attached to. But if we're building and talking about net new capabilities, my take, and kind of taking that spirit of meeting companies where they're at, is like, if I am building a defect report, right? At Google, we have like document processing with document AI. Like, that's a really good example where we can take these unstructured data blobs, whether they're images, correlate them to a defect report, and then, mine these reports for detail that we can, apply to a predictive analytics, solution. So for example, if I'm doing a demand forecast and it's been a very difficult season for this particular batch of commodities, so we're still talking strawberries, right? And I want to understand, historically, do I have more defects at this specific season than the last one? And now we can start to really build out our data foundation here, because it's not just the timing of the year and the season, right? It's the weather patterns associated to that region. Right, that's going to inform our demand forecast. What about, sales data that's happened historically? That's another thing. Market trends. I don't really see social media sentiment as, something that's driving the consumption of things like strawberries. But at the same time, right, at the crux of it, we're taking a lot of data, and ultimately we're trying to optimize production planning and inventory management and distribution strategies as a whole. When we're talking about a demand forecast, right now we start to get into how interconnected supply chain is in general. So this is connected to an inventory optimization. So this is more decision science, was data science. And now we start to really build out this framework of, I'm taking this AI solution, this predictive forecast that I ran of how many strawberries do I need at my distribution center. But now as a business, I want to start making decisions more deterministically about, well, how many pallets do I need at this distribution center? So now jumping from data science to decision optimization, we can start to kind of see and build our AI strategy in the sense of, we can understand and intuit whether, blatantly or latently, that there's almost a order of operations, like a PEMDAS for some of these AI analytical techniques. Because before we know that, just to bring it all together, to surface a business problem, a lot of business executives are using KPI reporting. This is analytical AI. We use that predictive AI to curate a demand forecast. Now we're imputing the output of my demand forecast into my mathematical optimization function. Now I can start to provide back and refeed this into the business. We're starting to build out this concept of a self-healing supply chain and chaining multiple methodologies together to solve this very simple problem.
When you were talking, it reminded me of a recent guest who came on, and he's got like 35 years in supply chain space, right? So I asked him, what's the most overhyped and underhyped tech in the industry today? And he says, AI and AI. The thinking is, when you focus on a problem, which some of the things you were just talking about, like the demand forecasting problem, and then you identify ways to use AI to solve or enhance it in a unique way, then the actual value of that is underhyped, right? But when you look at a business and say, we need to use AI, where can we put it in? Then it almost becomes a solution looking for a problem and becomes almost overhyped. Have you seen that as well? Like, actually, let's get controversial. Like, do you think he's right?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I thought you were gonna ask me that question, and I was like, oh, he kind of stole my answer. That's a really solid answer. But if I take it a step further, ultimately, we're getting a little bit more specific about generative AI, about how it is generative AI in a hype cycle or not. And I think if we were just talking about creating content or having models writing songs or poems, right? This is very cool still, and it's powerful technology and it delights consumers. But when we get across workflows and methodologies and decision science and data science, I almost see generative AI as an orchestration level layer to jump between, like, for example, imputing the output of my demand forecast into mathematical optimization. Generative AI with a LangChain framework can start to now connect the outputs of these functions to other tools. And so, from my perspective, that feels very real and tangible to me. That doesn't feel very hyped, but where I start to kind of lose maybe faith and, people saying that they have an AI solution that can help them is, well, are you associated to a line of business use case? Like, how can you measure truly? We're getting into this concept of applied AI as, I think the business and business executives in general that I work with are very hungry to know how AI can work for them and how can we measure that. And I think the line of business is the first place to start with that.
So I wanted to ask a little bit about specific industries or sectors, from your purview, obviously, where you've seen AI have a disproportionate impact within those supply chain operations.
Where I kind of see AI as having a disproportionate effect on those industries related to supply chain. Cybersecurity really comes up as a natural example in my mind because, first off, from a people perspective, there's a talent gap. And so if I'm in a supply chain and I'm trying to run a process, that it needs to be table stakes that the systems I'm working in are already secure. And so I want to make sure, like in using generative AI as an example, that I have agents built into my solution that can start to help automate some of those functionalities of cybersecurity. So to get really specific, right? If I'm concerned about data privacy and regulation, right? It's not just, are we talking about data privacy of strawberries or commodities in general? It's, we want to make sure that the business specification, our performance, that we're working with resilient systems that will not fail. And so when I think about where traditional reporting meets generative AI and where that reporting kind of comes into, you have two paradigms, right? Your reactive paradigm and your proactive paradigm. And for reactive reporting, you're really talking about known issue remediation, at the table, what keeps the lights on in a business. Just in general, where AI can help with that is kind of synthesizing and providing a layer of explainability on top of those KPIs for people who don't live within those KPIs day to day. And then when we're getting into this concept, and a lot of the businesses and customers I work with, is reactive reporting is table stakes. There's lots of dashboards everywhere. Where businesses want to take this is really this concept of, what actions do I need to take next? And in what area? What is hurting my bottom line, right? So ultimately tying down to the financial side of things, right? And when we're talking about this proactive insight is, and this is where generative AI is really the accelerator and the bridge here, is it's not just providing that layer of explainability that's super important, but now you can start to get inferences across your dashboard saying, and even beyond your dashboards, well, this percentage of commodities had this issues and they are associated to this region. You need to take a look at that. And so we can kind of build these solutions that are centered around human in the loop, where humans know what actions to take based on what AI is telling them. And there are going to be conflicts with the outputs of AI models and what human judgment says. And where I'm kind of working and with consumers now and thinking through in my own framework is, where are those touch points where the model's perspective wins, so to speak, versus where are those touch points where the human judgment should be always prioritized. And I think this is now where we're starting to get in the concept of super intelligence, right? And so we could kind of riff off it a little bit.
It's actually a great segue because another thing I wanted to get your take on is the way in which the AI boom, which we are currently in, I don't think you can argue with that in terms of the focus and attention on it across industries, in media, et cetera, how that will impact the supply chain jobs and then the skills. I think I'm more interested in the skills needed in the industry, right? So there is a potential impact to supply chain jobs, but I think what are the skills that are now maybe more important than ever as a result of this?
Where things get interesting is, okay, if we are expecting efficiency impacts, what do humans do with that extra time? And that really goes into the segue of what skills do I need for the supply chain of the future? And I think we're still figuring that out as an industry. Where I've kind of landed, in my humble opinion, is non-technical is like follow the curiosity. And, from a technical perspective, it's really about looking for ways proactively is where are those spaces and touch points where the model quite isn't there yet.
Let's imagine that there are some students out there and they want to be just like Amanda. They want to work in AI, big tech company, solving big problems. You're thinking about the global supply chain. From your perspective, what would be some advice in terms of, hey, these are the skills or these are tools that someone should develop to work in the AI space and work in supply chain?
We're all a part of a supply chain, right? So in supply chain, it's so broad. So my first thought is think about what aspect of the supply chain excites you and just think about it from a grassroots level. Like when you're at a farmer's market and you're holding all this fresh fruit in your hands, like I personally think back to like what farmer grew this? Or if this is from a different farm compared to one I saw at another booth, like what were those factors that led to it? And I feel like having that data driven perspective, or that I can quantify, and I have a framework now that no whatever problem I'm facing, I have a way of thinking about like, how do I measure that? How do I take action on that? And honestly, like my mathematics undergraduate really prepared me for that. This was kind of a turning point in my career. When I was at AT&T, I'm the only one on the patent, so I'm very proud of that. But I patented this inventory management solution for software-defined networking. And so basically, it was the same concept of how do we measure ephemeral resources, and the patent's essentially about tying it back to that orchestrator. But going through that intellectual property process at a corporation, and I believe I was 24 at the time, I felt like a little bit over my head and I was swimming in all those details. But that concept, and I feel like that's defined my whole career, is taking those challenges and big steps and just raising your hand and saying, I want to try this, even though I'm not completely sure if it's going to work out. And having good managers who support that curiosity, who support chances that you can take to learn new things. Like I've been so blessed in my life to have wonderful mentors who believed in me, even if I wasn't having that like mentorship need met necessarily in my workplace. I've always felt like I'm growing. And one of my mottos is don't make the same mistake twice. And I feel like I've done a really good job with that as well.
All right. So I'm going to take us in a totally different direction now. I know you said earlier, you kind of slipped it in there. You're an avid reader. So I'm looking for some recommendations, and I'm curious, what is the best book that you've read in the past year?
Yeah, well, this year's been really transformative for me in a lot of ways, personally, professionally, just in all the ways. And I feel like what kickstarted that is last September, around this time last year, I read for the first time No Surrender, a field manual for creating work with heart by Paul Wagner. And what it's really about is each of us is taking this idea that's taking form over the course of our lives. And we're in this massive cosmic ecosystem on a rock that's spinning around the universe. Our internal system biologically is changing, our world is changing. And just having that reckoning of how do I follow my intuition while also balancing like what delivers practical results in my life very quickly. So it's a book about discipline, but it's also tied to what makes you passionate about life.
Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the future and where we're headed, but I think it's important whenever we're talking about the topic of AI to be specific. Is there one specific use case that maybe isn't viable today from a tech perspective, but in the near future, 6 months, a year, maybe a little bit more, will be viable that you think is really exciting or is going to have significant impact?
Yes, and this is where I think where hype meets actuality, right? Imagine combining generative AI with blockchain for like supply chain management. And where I think this can be really powerful is bringing it back to the PACA Act is blockchain can create this immutable record for every transaction in the supply chain from the moment that the commodity is harvested to its final delivery in the store. And so we don't just have traceability, now we have this universal ledger of what was the health of the strawberry at the distribution center versus at the store. And then I imagine with generative AI, we would get this kind of solution to tie the ledger of the transaction to the actual image of the strawberry. So we get those almost touch points of health of all commodities, not strawberries. And ultimately, right, this reduces fraud. We can understand very in this universal ledger, right, that the USDA in this ideal would own. And now we have transparent information about origin of the product, quality of the product, why a product was, accepted or rejected at the store or distribution center. And ultimately, I think this is what consumers are really hungry for is that transparency and their knowledge that in this hypothetical future, if I'm a consumer and there's a QR code on my clamshell strawberries, what if I could see the lifetime of that strawberry, all those in the clamshell, right? And maybe the consumer doesn't need to know all that. And so I just kind of wonder where are those other ways? And like with quantum computing, right, we can start to weave these technologies of the future with the technologies of the present. And I see generative AI as a vehicle for transporting that information across systems, processes, and people.
Awesome. So before we close out, we are a podcast, so maybe we're trying to go a little bit viral. I won't ask you anything too controversial, but one thing I like to ask all of our guests is, what's your hot take on the supply chain industry today?
I would say in with the new doesn't mean out with the old. And sometimes not everything is an AI problem. Sometimes it's more of a conditional logic, human reasoning function. And sometimes I am a little fatigued by automation everywhere. But I think it's an important ideal to strive to because ultimately we want that efficiency, but not at the cost of, human reasoning and humans working together collectively to solve problems. We still need each other. And, I think especially when we're talking about labor workforce that's under a lot of transformation right now, not just, stepping outside of supply chain, right? I was reading this article that this younger generation is considering options alternative to college. And I think that's a wonderful thing to get to experiment with different life paths, right? Because we're all on our own journey with things. And I want to make sure that the future we have those frameworks of we're also not enforcing, old standards for you need a master's degree to do this job, right? We need to be more flexible that there's multiple ways of learning and coming at a problem.
I learned a lot. I know our listeners will too. I think about there was a lot of really amazing detail that we dug into today. So I just want to really thank you for your time and for spending it with us. We've talked a lot about strawberries, which is great because I think it carried what is often a very complex thing to wrap your head around, carried it through with a lot of those examples. You talked about never making the same mistake twice, which is your motto. And then thinking about for the future, this idea that in with the new doesn't mean out with the old. So outside of a lot of the awesome detail and nuance we got, I think those things will stick with me. But most importantly, Amanda, thank you for spending time with us. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a supply chain champion.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm super grateful to have met you, and I hope we get to collaborate in the future with additional use cases.
Thank you for listening to Supply Chain Champions. To get connected and learn more, visit project44.com and click the link in the comments to subscribe to Project 44's newsletter. Tune in, get smart, and move forward.